well as our co-hosts, the ICA. We welcome you all here tonight and really appreciative of everybody's time and presence to share this space with us this evening. This talk is part of the Humanities Center's Environmental Humanities Speaker Series, which we've been doing all year. But it's also, as you'll hear some of my colleagues explain, what we hope to be the first in a series of lectures around Black food justice to commemorate the legacy of John Lewis and his work building a vibrant Black-led urban agriculture system in Richmond and beyond. So as we begin, I think we could take a moment to just offer respect and gratitude to the land we're gathered on, as well as all the ancestors and elders, past, present, and future, that have and continue and one day will call this place home. I'd also like to welcome our virtual guests, who I think are streaming in with us already. Thank you for virtually being present and sharing this time with us. It is great to have everybody here. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by Virginia Humanities, the School of World Studies, and Sociology at VCU. For some just brief thanks, I'd like to thank Christina Stanchu, the director of the Humanities Center, who sends her regrets, but has been instrumental in helping this talk happen, as well as some folks behind the scenes, like Ronnie Sisvath, who's our Humanities Center administrative and communications specialist, Melanie Barnes, who's the assistant to the chair in sociology, and all the amazing staff at the ICA who've been helping us this evening get this together. So I have a couple quick event announcements, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Susan. The ICA this Friday is having their spring premiere, and it's Friday, February 24th from 5 to 10 p.m. It's celebrating the unveiling of McLean, which is a new public work by Naveen G. Dasos, as well as the opening of a group exhibition called So It Appears. And so the spring premiere event on Friday is going to feature artist talks with Naveen Dasos and Levester Williams, who's a VCU grad. And there will also be some live performances by DJ Haram and Sadaf Nava. Then I have a Humanities Center event announcement. On Thursday, next week Thursday, March 2nd at 6 p.m., we have our next speaker in the Environmental Humanities Speaker Series, which is cultural critic Heather Davis, who's giving a talk called Petro Time. There's more information about that on the Humanities Center website. So that's all I've got. I'm going to give the mic over to Susan, and thank you all.
Thanks, Jesse. Hey, everybody. I'm Susan. I'm the chair of the sociology department here at VCU. And I really actually want to give a special shout out to Jesse. He's really been instrumental in making tonight happen. About 9 months ago, I was hanging out with two of our speakers tonight, Art Burton and Duran Chavis, and we were talking about ways that we could honor John Lewis and the legacy of John Lewis. John was the catalyst of the, kind of the center of the world of Richmond Black food justice movement. He was the longtime executive director of Renew Richmond, and John left us way too soon, but his legacy endures. Well, anyway, Art Duran and I had been kind of going back and forth about what we could do to honor John's legacy, and we decided that an annual lecture series and community event series would be a really great way to do this. And I went to Jesse maybe like 3 weeks later, and I said, hey, we got this idea, and Jesse's like, yes, let's make it happen. So I really want to say thanks, Jesse. I'm going to be introducing two folks, Art Burton and Duran Chavis, but before I introduce them, I really want to say thank you to John's family. In attendance tonight, we have his mother, Harriet, his father, Peter, and his beautiful sons. There are other Lewis family members and friends here too, and I really want to say thank you for being here. And more importantly, thank you for blessing us with your wonderful son and the wonderful father to the boys. And know that the work that he was doing continues here in Richmond, as evidenced by everything that's going on. I was reading some posts online, and somebody in John's community said John Lewis was a superhero, and John Lewis was a superhero. So I'm not going to talk anymore. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Mr. Art Burton, who will say a few words about John Lewis. Art is the executive director and founder of Kinfolk Community, Community Unity and Action in the East End Food Justice Corridor, to name a few. He is a lifelong social activist who's been fighting for the rights of Black people since he was 8 years old. He is a very dear friend of mine and somebody who John introduced me to a decade ago. So, Art, the mic is yours.
Good evening. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here and honor John R. Lewis III. The moment that brought us here was a conversation that Duran and I had in the middle of the George Floyd world racial protests and the worldwide COVID-19 epidemic. And all of a sudden, everything that we had been promoting and saying for 20 some odd years finally made sense to the world. And we looked around and realized that we were in the midst of a food justice movement. And while there was a conversation about us not being taking as much responsibility as we should or taking too much credit than we deserved and standing in the way of the forward movement, we realized that the moment had suddenly organically appeared and we didn't even realize that our dream of our work had been accomplished. It was funny to us that he was now considered a national food justice leader, and I was suddenly a celebrating legendary social justice leader after 21 years of being crazy and hated. And while we realized that and were excited about the moment, and we were in the middle of this conversation and conflict over who deserved the credit and who was in whose way, we realized that while we were all of those things and this movement was here and everybody was passionate about it, there was one person who was the visionary and the individual and who was the driving force behind everything that was happening around us. And while all of us were enjoying the fruits of the labor and the victory and in the celebration, that one person was not here, was not known, and no one knew about him because he had done this work before most people had came to do this work. And that was a young man by the name of John R. Lewis III. And I consider him one of this city's greatest social justice leaders of his generation. John was unique. We were talking the other day and last night, and Duran reminded me that they were 20 years old when I met them. It was amazing because I always thought, well, Duran always looked old. I don't know, but I didn't know it was 21, 24 when I met him, and how far we had come in those years. John Lewis, I got to tell you, me and Duran, we were similar in that we didn't talk to anybody that wasn't Black, okay? We were old school social justice people, and we believed you didn't talk to anybody who was not your color, anybody who wasn't down with the movement, and you did this work for nothing. And that was the model. And John Lewis changed how we define Black power and brought a whole new revolutionary spirit to the idea of what a social justice activist was, what his responsibilities were. He defined how we looked at ourselves as leaders, what our responsibilities were, and what our disposition was to be. He made it, his thing was get in the room. You got to get in the room. You got to demand that your allies partner and collaborate with you. You have to, it is your responsibility to partner and include those people who do not look like you look. You cannot allow those people who say they believe in social justice, not to contribute, not to participate, and not to allow you to lead. And that was a revolutionary thing for us, because he made us talk. And while John was Black Power and revolutionary, he had the spirit of Ubuntu, which was this quality that includes an essential human virtue. John was a part of humanity long before any of us saw that. John made it cool and acceptable for all social, economic, racist, creeds, and colors to come together for the common good of children. Allies that were not of black and brown skin were intentionally enlisted into the fight for freedom. John demanded that we do that. We were responsible to insist on partnerships and the sharing of resources. We weren't allowed not to ask those who had to give us for our community. John believed in self-efficacy. Frontline, black-led, with allies operating under our leadership. Us showing up in the community, doing things differently and in a different way than they had ever been done. That yes, it was okay for there suddenly to be a black farmer in the hood. It didn't just have to be policemen, just didn't have to be drug dealers, and it was okay for us to dig in the dirt and plant a garden and show people what that looked like. John was the believer in the big idea. Duran talked last night about the bounce. John was the guy who you went to, and no matter what idea you had, he made it big. He insisted that we look at how urban agriculture be used to improve the lives of hundreds and thousands, and how it was unacceptable for us not to talk about these things. I met John in 2006 when the city started its food policy, and he was coming out to Carolina where the meeting was held, and he ran into me, and he said, we gotta do something, we gotta do something. The city is talking about food policy, and there are no black people in the room, and the only people in the room are white people talking about restaurants and chickens in the backyard. We gotta get some black people in the room. And that's what we did. All of the people who do, young black people who do food policy and health policy and sit on SHAB boards, that was a John Lewis thing. That was what he insisted. That was what he demanded. Youth and agriculture. John saw urban agriculture as the tool that when I said I wanted to create a bottom-up model of what what community wealth looked like in transforming black communities, John insisted that urban agriculture was the only vehicle that could accomplish what I was trying to accomplish. It was the most powerful, organic, essential, and most overlooked tool necessary to change the lives and quality of lives of black people, and especially black children. And John's heart was for the children. And so when John insisted that we were allowed to be stipend for the work, that black volunteerism in the hood didn't necessarily have to mean it was done for free. That if you understood racial inequality, you understood the need for black people to have resources for their time. And John changed the paradigm in how we looked at that. So today, everyone who receives a stipend and gets some compensation, that was John's dream for our community, and how this work would be funded and how it would be built. John was cool. It was his black power model was not an angry model. That's why he was so effective. Duran and I, we were always angry. We was angry. And we didn't talk to nobody. We didn't like nobody. We didn't like many black people. We just like, we was just, but John had this spirit of mental calmness and composure and evenness of temper even when he was angry. I once asked John, how do you smile when you're mad? And he said, my father taught me how to put a pin in it. I said, what do you mean put a pin in it? He said, my father says when you see something that's not right or is upsets you or gets you in your feelings, instead of you charging through, fighting through, trying to battle it, just stick a pin in that spot where you saw it and move around it. So you will always know where it is and you will never allow it to get in your way again. And he was the first who showed us how not to be angry and to move around. My nonprofit was built on the words of John Lewis. When he agreed to be my fiscal agent, he had one condition. Your mission statement must include 3 words: self-efficacy, self-reliance, and self-empowerment. And that is what we built. The idea of our mission, our Urban Conservation Corps, was built to funnel youth and children into John and Duran's program, to be paid. I share all this with you so that we can set the record straight about while all of these accomplishments and these amazing moments are true and we are all celebrated, and there is this generation of there are African-American urban farms throughout the city now where there used to be only Johns. There are young African-American people living their lives, building families, building communities based on living a life that includes food justice and urban agriculture, while we have celebrated national leaders and people in the city government, young people making decisions in equity and equality and racial justice, that all of these things were made possible because of a vision of a young man had about what this community could be, because he insisted that we have the big idea, we show up differently in the world, that we could build lives through urban agriculture, that we could change communities. And so while we would love to say we did it all, we wanted to take this moment to remind everyone who does this work, everyone who celebrates it, that as opposed to us looking at each other and figure out who we should celebrate the most, we want to take a moment to celebrate and honor the young man who was most responsible for all of us today and this extraordinary movement and this extraordinary moment to change the lives of every child in this entire city. And that is John R. Lewis III, in my opinion, the greatest social justice leader of his generation. Thank you.
Is this the one? Yeah. Okay. I'm like the MC tonight. I'll be the microphone person when questions come, so I'm really excited about that. It's now just an incredible honor to actually introduce Duran Chavis, who's going to introduce our keynote tonight. And I just don't even know where to start, to be totally honest with you. Duran's accolades and things that he has started and initiatives in this city are so many. He's the founder and director of Happily Natural, which includes Sankofa Community Orchard and numerous farm sites in and around the city, in Petersburg and in Amelia County. He is the leader of the Central Virginia Urban Farm Fellowship, operates a farm incubator, the Resiliency Garden Project, and is a board member on numerous things, including Maggie Walker Community Land Trust. If I listed everything that Duran has done, I would be here forever. But needless to say, he is a national leader in Black social justice, reparative land justice, and urban ag. And there is no one in the movement who does not owe where they are today to John and to Duran. So Duran.
Thank you. So I want to thank Brother Art Burton for sharing words about John. I came here prepared to say a couple words, but you took everything that I could possibly say about my brother. I will say this though, had it not been for me meeting John, I would not be doing this work, right? It was I was probably doing that pop-up farmers market work when I first met John, but we were at an event. I tell people this all the time. We were at a lecture to see Will Allen over in Bon Air, and we were in line waiting to get some food. I didn't know the brother, and I just introduced myself. We got to chopping it up, and the conversation led to him asking me if I had applied for a grant, right? And I was like, nah, but I was thinking about applying for it. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna apply for it too. And in that moment, we were like, yo, we shouldn't be competing against each other for funding. We should be collaborating with each other. And I tell that story because it's so important, right? This nonprofit industrial complex causes us to have risks with one another, like everybody trying to do their own thing in the island unto itself. But we subverted all that, you know what I mean? Early in the work. And it meant the world to me to have somebody that was my age that, even though we were like yin and yang, to be frank, John had a particular je ne sais quoi with the people. I have my own particular je ne sais quoi with the people, but it was compatible in the sense of like it was a duality. If anybody know John, he was really big into martial arts, and so that yin and yang principle, like I feel like in the time that we had to work with each other, we embodied that. So much so that it was one time we applied for a grant, and they were like, nah, y'all a little too militant, and it was because I wasn't involved, not because John was involved. I consider him a genius. He was forward thinking. I worked at social services. He worked at Richmond Behavioral Health Authority. Both of us were dipping out on our job to go do garden stuff and food policy work. But somehow, some way, this man had convinced his boss that he could go over to G.H. Reed and teach kids how to garden as a tool for preventing adverse behaviors. I didn't have that luxury. I never convinced my boss. I was just kind of like dipping off. But, I admired him for that. I was like, yo, how the hell did you finesse them like that, that you were able to go out here? And it wasn't a finesse. It's just that he was able to meld those worlds together so seamlessly that, the outcomes he was making happen over at G.H. Reed were just real. So I'll stop there. To me, John is representative of Black collaboration. He is representative of forward thinking. He was a visionary, and I will always, lift his name up in the work that we do. It's imperative for people to know that this work comes from somewhere, and that we as a community are better for, people that were able to, crack the code and figure out how to make this stuff work in the community. So thank you, Lewis family, for coming and being a part of this. This has meant the world for me. I'm not going to belabor, the conversation today. I want to introduce Malik Yakini, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. Detroit Black Community Food Security Network operates a 7-acre urban farm and is spearheading the opening of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. This is a cooperatively owned grocery store in Detroit's North End. It's an honor to have you here today, Baba Malik. This conversation about Black food sovereignty is of import for our community to understand that as a cultural lens that we frame this urban agriculture work in as Black people. Like, while we love the kumbaya and the butterflies and the environmental stewardship that goes along with butterfly garden planting and rain gardens and stuff like that, we have a cultural imperative to build power in our communities, and it starts with one thing that we all do, which is eat, right? So without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic to my brother Malik. Yeah, give it up for Baba Malik Yakini.
Good evening. How's everyone doing? I'm very glad to be back in Richmond. Brother Duran brought me maybe 6 years ago, something like that. And I'm always pleased when people invite me back for a second time because I speak some places, I speak a lot of places one time and don't get a second invitation. So I am thrilled to be back in Richmond and to witness the incredible work that's happening here. I want to start by giving praise to the Creator, and I never try to impose my spiritual views on anybody else. However you conceptualize the force that gives order to the universe, that's fine. But I always have to put that out in front of me, and also have to acknowledge my ancestors, those that African people share collectively, and also those in my personal bloodline who I continue to be inspired by. I'm very honored to be the first speaker in the John R. Lewis III lecture series, and I'm also very honored to have met several members of his family today. And although I didn't know Brother John, I've heard a lot in the last 24 hours about the tremendous work that he has done and the tremendous influence that he had and continues to have. So I am honored to be speaking as part of this lecture series. I also want to thank, of course, my brother Duran for initiating the invitation. I want to thank Susan, and I want to thank Jesse and all the other folks who put this on. I want to thank Savannah. You know, sometimes we don't think about the folks who are behind the scenes dealing with the mics and all these kind of things, but it takes all that to make these things happen. So I want to give gratitude to everybody who helped to make this a possibility. So my talk is entitled Growing Kale, Shifting Power, and Building Black Food Sovereignty. The majority of it is going to focus on the building black food sovereignty part. I'll say a little bit about growing kale, and I'll say something about shifting power. But shifting power is going to be embedded really in everything I say during the PowerPoint presentation. So maybe I'll start by saying that I'm from Detroit, and many people from Detroit have a fierce loyalty to Detroit. You know, people in Detroit get D's tattooed on their arms, and you know, like are very defensive about the city and have a great love for the city. And I'm like that too. So just know that I'm a Detroit lover. And even though lots of bad stuff happens in Detroit as well, we have this tremendous legacy of struggle in the city of Detroit, both in the Black freedom movement and its various manifestations. Any major organization struggling for Black freedom in the United States had a major presence in the city of Detroit, but also the labor movement. Both the traditional labor movement had a huge presence in Detroit, and of course because of the automobile industry being centered in Detroit, but also the more revolutionary aspects of the labor movement, such as the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, evolved in Detroit and had influence throughout this country, and that influence continues to exist both in Detroit and throughout the country. So I want to say just a bit about my personal food journey, and this is kind of how I'm going to introduce Kale into the conversation. And I'll say that I was born in 1956, and I like telling people how old I am, unlike some people who be trying to shave some years off their age. But I like telling people how old I am because it helps to place me at a particular era in time. And so in many ways, I'm a child of the 1960s and the 1970s. I was 13 in 1969. And so, you know, 13 is a very important year in many traditions, because usually children are moving from childhood to young adulthood and really trying to figure out where do they fit into the world, what is their identity, all these kind of questions. Sometimes their handwriting starts to change, they start trying to express their individuality. And so I came of age in that time period. So my mother was also born in Detroit in the 1920s, and my father was born in Detroit in the 1920s, shortly after their families moved to Detroit from the South. My father's family moved from Georgia to work in the Ford Rouge plant, and my mother's family moved from Arkansas, and my grandfather, her father, worked as a printer for all of his life. My mother, of course, learned to cook primarily from her mother. I'm not sure my grandfather cooked at all, frankly. So my mother learned how to cook primarily from her mother, who was from the South. And so, as most African Americans, I grew up on a diet we would call soul food diet. And although I am a vegan now, and I try not to be like a snobby vegan. You know, some vegans are snobby. Like, you know, I try not to be that kind. I'm not a judgmental vegan. And I'm about to tell you why I'm not judgmental. So as a child, you know, my mother made, you know, all kind of things, pork chops, black-eyed peas, cornbread, green, all, you know, all the standard fare. But there was one thing that she made that I enjoyed more than anything else. The problem is she only made it once a year, and that was on New Year's Day. And, say it again? Uh-oh, okay. Somebody hit the nail on the head, but yeah, she made black-eyed peas too. But the one thing that she made that I really love is what they call in the store chitterlings. Don't hate me, sis. Don't hate me. or what they call in the black community chitlins. And so that was, no lie, that was my very favorite food in the whole world. She only made it on New Year's Day, and there was an extensive cleaning ritual. For those who have consumed chitlins before, you might be familiar with it. And then we had a small stove in the basement, and she would take them in the basement and cook them. It required several hours, and there's an aroma associated with cooking chitlins. So that's why it was done in the basement. But then when they were finished, we put them on a plate and put hot sauce on them, and man, that was my joint. I'm telling you, some chitlins. But in 1969, I was in the 8th grade, and I was in my social studies class, and I had 2 teachers in the 8th grade who were both from West Virginia, and they were both homeboys. They were friends who had grown up together, played basketball together, came to Detroit in the mid-1960s to work, and both ended up teaching at the same school. One of these teachers was my social studies teacher, and his homeboy was my English teacher. And I want to name their names just out of respect. My social studies teacher was Ronald McCombs, and my English teacher was Melvin Peters. Melvin Peters is still with us. Ronald McCombs is an ancestor now. But a few things happened that semester in 1969. One of the things that happened is they played a record by a guitarist named Jimi Hendrix. Some of you might have heard of him before. Throw your hands up if you know anything about Jimi Hendrix. All right, a few of y'all, most people. And before Ronald McCombs put the record on, he said, "Ha ha ha, this gonna blow y'all's minds." And then he played Machine Gun by Jimi Hendrix, and it blew my mind. I had never heard anybody play guitar like that. And so immediately I wanted to play guitar. And about 6 months later, I started playing guitar, and I've been playing for all of my life since that time. Another seminal thing happened that semester in 1969. And that was that he played for our class. In fact, what they would do, the two of them would combine their classes together. So we'd have 60 people in the room listening to records or a guest speaker or whatever the case may be. The other thing they did that semester was they played a record by Malcolm X called Message to the Grassroots. If you ever heard that speech, raise your hand. Okay, if you haven't, you might want to listen to it. But in that speech, Malcolm talked about several things, and it helped me to shape my view as a black person, so-called, in American society, and helped me to begin to understand about racism and power and things like that. But he also talked about what he called the house slave and the field slave. And he said during the time that our ancestors were enslaved, there were 2 types of slaves. I don't like using the word slave, but I'm quoting Malcolm, because many of us don't use the word slave because we want to think about our ancestors as being in a condition of being enslaved. The definition of who they are as a human being was not a slave. But nonetheless, that's the language Malcolm used, house slave and field slave. And he said the house slaves ate what he called high up on the hog. They ate if there is a better part of the hog, they ate those parts. And he said the field slaves, the masses, ate what was left over. And he talked about the hoof and the snout and the tail and the guts. And he said, that's what you were then, gut eaters. And some of y'all are still gut eaters today. Now, this shocked my 13-year-old chitlin-loving mind. For real though, for real. This is the honest to God truth. And so for the first time, I started thinking about food beyond just, do I like the way it tastes? When can I get some more? Where's the hot sauce? You know, my horizons broadened. And so I started to think about food more within a cultural and a historical context, but I also started to think about the health impact of food. By 1975, I had given up eating meat altogether. I had become a vegetarian. By 1981, I had become what I later learned was called a vegan. At the time, I didn't know what it was called, but my body told me it's time to let go of eggs and cheese and all that, so I did it. And then I later saw some terminology, oh, it's vegan, okay, whatever. And so I became intensely concerned about how diet can contribute to optimal health, both our physical health, but also kind of our general sense of how we connect with the world. And also, I began to understand that food affects the mental aspect of ourselves as well. That, in fact, for many years I was a school teacher and a principal, and I saw concrete evidence of how food can impact the ability of children to learn, to retain information, to behave in socially appropriate ways. So I became very interested in food and how it impacts our bodies and minds and spirits in general. After being a vegan for about 12 years, there's a holistic doctor who now lives in Atlanta named Dr. Jewel Pookrum, who lived in Detroit. She had delivered my oldest child, my daughter. She's an OBGYN. And I went to a gathering that she had at her clinic, and it was a potluck, and somebody had a kale salad. And I tasted it. I had never eaten kale before. I grew up eating collard greens, mustard greens, turnip greens. Kale, I didn't know anything about. I tasted this kale, man, I got hooked. I'm telling you. Prior to kale, broccoli was my favorite vegetable. But then when I tasted kale, I was totally hooked on kale. So in the 20-some years I've been farming and gardening, I can tell you that kale is definitely my number one vegetable that I love to grow and love to consume. I grow it in great quantities, different varieties, and I am a kale lover. Let's switch gears for just a minute. You know, American society likes for people to be, or let me put it like, let me be more clear. The rulers, or if you will, the ruling class of American society profits from people being ahistorical. Meaning that if we don't really understand the historical forces that shape society today, we can't really have an understanding of why we're in the situation we're in or how we get out of it. And so I think it's very important that we have a broad understanding of what has happened over the past 400 or 500 years. And I'm not going to try to go into that lesson right now, but I'm sure most of you know that beginning with the Portuguese and followed quickly by the Spanish and the Dutch and the French and the English and the Belgians began to move outside of Western Europe and began to explore first the west coast of Africa, and then Vasco da Gama was able to go around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa and make his way into the Indian Ocean, opening up the Indian subcontinent and other parts of Asia to Portugal. And after several years of extracting gold from West Africa and then seeing that there was something in West Africa that was even more valuable to these Europeans than gold, which was the labor provided by black bodies, several of these European countries began to shift to what we now call the Western Hemisphere. And I want to say, by the way, terms like Western Hemisphere and Mideast and the Far East, these are all Eurocentric terms that center Europe in our consciousness because they presuppose that Europe is the center of everything and we measure everything else in relationship to Europe. I was listening to something today on the radio that was talking about near space. And I said, oh, that's kind of similar to, you know, that's kind of similar to how Europeans saw. And so since most of the cartographers were from Europe, the maps that we've seen and the globes that have been created also tend to center Europe in our minds, both by making it appear larger than it actually is, and in some cases centering it on the map. So these European countries came into what we now call the Western Hemisphere and began to exterminate indigenous populations. Well, first began to try to enslave the indigenous populations in order to produce wealth. And sugarcane, of course, was the main product initially that they were interested in producing because it produced great wealth and it really transformed Europe in many ways. I don't want to try to get into all of that right now because it's too long a story. But this resulted in eventually in them transporting millions of Africans from the west coast primarily of Africa, from what we now call Ghana, from what we now call Nigeria, from what we now call Cameroon, all the way down to Angola, to the so-called Western Hemisphere. And those enslaved Africans, of course, worked in order to produce great wealth for those European colonizing countries. It also displaced the indigenous population to a large extent of what we now call the Americas and the Caribbean. Many, not all, as my brother Duran pointed out today, you know, genocide was committed, but clearly there are still indigenous people, so that we don't want to talk about indigenous people as if it's something in the past, because indigenous people are still with us here today. But this dispossessing indigenous people of their land, enslaving of Africans, and production of great wealth that benefited Europe and later the United States has helped to define the society and the world that we live in now. And so if justice and equity is what we're striving for, then we have to understand what the root causes are of injustice and inequity. And I would submit to you that the racialized global system of capitalism is one of the main causes that we see great inequity in American society and throughout the world. And in fact, we could even say that capitalism developed out of colonialism and enslavement and provided, in some ways, the fuel for the kind of modern capitalist economies to develop. For example, many people cite textile mills in the UK as being one of the first signs of the Industrial Revolution. And those textile mills got a huge amount of the cotton that they processed from the southern part of the United States as a result of the labor of enslaved Africans. So many people would rather talk about concepts like diversity and inclusion, and I'm not against that. I'm with that. Diversity, inclusion, equity, justice. But I would submit that we have to go a little deeper than that, and what we need really is fundamental systematic change. And so there are three major systems that I think continue to create this inequity in the world. The first being this global racialized capitalism that I talked about. And the second is the system of white supremacy. Y'all familiar with that term, right? I want to like take the temperature in the room, because last week I spoke at a thing in Detroit. I spoke in an academy, and I did a presentation called Understanding White Supremacy and Internalized Racial Oppression. And the person who invited me to speak was suspended from the program because of what I said. So I just want to take the temperature in the room and make sure everybody's comfortable with those terms. Because some of us use these terms all the time, and you know, and it's no thing, but to some people it sounds shocking. So there's clearly a global system that continues to give privilege and advantage to people who are defined as white. And let me be clear also that this whole idea of black people, white people, race, all of this is an artificial construct that's been created by human beings. But there is absolutely a global system that gives advantage to people who define themselves as white. Even in American society, where clearly the majority of white people are not wealthy, and clearly the majority of white people are not part of the ruling class, but even those white people who are impoverished or who are middle class still see themselves as having some advantage because they are white. If you want to do an in-depth study of this, you might want to read the book Caste by, thank you, by Isabel Wilkerson. A brilliant work that talks about how race plays out in American society. The system of white supremacy manifests itself in many ways, ways that are overt and ways that are subtle. So of course we have the kind of systemic racism that excludes black people from the wealth of the society. You probably know that the average white family in this country has 14 times the wealth of the average black family. But we also have what I call the evil twin sister of white supremacy, which is Eurocentrism. This idea that if something originated in Europe, that it is innately better than things that originated in Africa, Asia, or among the indigenous people of the Americas. And it's permeated our consciousness so much that we don't even think about things like the names of the days of the week, like tomorrow is Wednesday or Woden's Day, Thor's Day, Fry's. Why are we calling the names of the days of the week after European deities? What effect does this have on our minds? And there's many other ways, many other subtle ways that the system of white supremacy suggests to white people that they are somehow superior, their ideas about the world, their cultural expressions are superior than those of the rest of the planet. And then we have this system, this third oppressive system called patriarchy, which I am in an ongoing process of trying to recover from and trying to figure out what does it mean to be a sane, balanced man walking through the earth. But this system of patriarchy that suggests that somehow men are more innately qualified to lead, that men should be paid more for doing the same job, that suppresses the feminine energy in general. And I would suggest to you, in fact, I would challenge the men in the audience today to really examine how you might unconsciously participate in patriarchy and suggest to you that none of us can be whole human beings unless we embrace the feminine part of ourselves. So patriarchy doesn't just underdevelop women, it also underdevelops men. I could do a whole talk about that, but I don't want to because I'm trying to get to the main thing. But I'm just trying to drop some things that hopefully you'll do some further exploration of. So we have systemic oppression that comes in the form of racialized global capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy. And in the midst of that, we're trying to figure out how to create justice. And so I would suggest that simply programs to include more people of color is not the solution. That what we need, in fact, is a shift in power. The reason people are still oppressed is because we don't have the power to control our own destiny. And that the power is concentrated in the hands of people who are defined as white. The power is concentrated even more so in the hands of people who are wealthy and white. And the rest of us, this came out, of course, during the Occupy movement, however many years ago that was, where, the society in general kind of learned that 1% of the population controls more than 90% of the wealth. So what we need is a fundamental shift in power. And I've tried to kind of update my language. Back in the day, we used to say we need a revolution. When you say that now, people get a little, nervous. And so, I don't say that too much anymore, but essentially that's what we need. So I want to invite you to be about the business of, in big and small ways, dismantling the system of capitalism so that we can have a chance of creating justice and equity on the earth. Everybody with me? Yeah. Okay. So let's get into this PowerPoint. And first I want to say I'm starting with this slide. This is my brother Kadiri Senefara, who is now an ancestor. He was the manager of D-Town Farm, the farm operated by our organization, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. I'm starting with him because I'm starting with an ancestor, and I'm going to end with an ancestor, because I think it's extremely important that we lift up and pay tribute to our ancestors, particularly those who've made positive contributions. The Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey said the greatest weapon used against the Negro is disorganization. And I agree with that, and I would urge those of you who consider yourself to be black people to be involved in an organization which is building power for black people. And that if you don't see an existing organization that's doing that in a way that you think should be done, that you should start one. This is what the Honorable Kwame Ture taught us. So my early work in black food sovereignty began at an African Center school that I was principal of for about 22 years, called Nsodoma Institute. And at that school, we were concerned about not only black people knowing about our history, knowing about the African continent, but we were also concerned about some deeper lessons that we think provide the undergirding for African culture. And one of those lessons that you'll see in African cultures, whether it's in the West, the East, the North, or the South, is this idea of the interconnectedness of everything. That human beings are not separate from nature, that we are part of the matrix of life. On the other hand, after the suppression of various traditions, and particularly suppression of women in European societies, many Europeans had this idea that human beings were here to dominate the earth. In fact, some of the interpretations of scripture that have come down to us, and I think they're actually misinterpretations, use the word dominion, that man was given dominion over the earth. I've heard from some scholars that actually the original Hebrew meant more like stewardship, which I can get with that, right? But dominion gives you the idea that we are here to conquer the earth, to subdue the earth, and that is exactly what many of the European colonists had in mind when they came here to the so-called Western Hemisphere. So we were concerned about teaching this larger lesson about interconnectedness, and we thought that gardening might be a way to do that. Because when you're working in a garden, you begin to understand the relationship between human beings and plants, between insects and plants, between the weather, the insects, the plants, and the human beings, and how all of these things work together. So we were subtly trying to teach this lesson through experiential learning in hopes that the students would see themselves as being more fully connected with the flow of life. We started something at the school in 1999 called, well, first we started a school garden, and then we started something called the Shamba Organic Garden Collective, because we started having parents at the school who were saying, well, I want a garden in my backyard too. We had a school garden that all the students were required to participate in, and every teacher at the school was required to have at least one lesson per week that had a food security tie-in, whether it was the Kiswahili teacher, the French teacher, the art teacher, the gym teacher. We were making thinking about food critically part of the school culture. So we started the Shamba Organic Garden Collective to accommodate the many parents and community members who were saying, I want a garden also. And what we would do, we had a team called the Groundbreakers that would go out on Saturdays, and we would do the most labor-intensive part of starting people's gardens. We would till the land or turn it over and prepare the beds in hopes that then folks will come and plant the seeds or put the transplants in the ground. Most times that happened, but sometimes even after that intensive work, they still didn't follow through on the garden. In the red shirt, that's my good brother Kalindi Iyi, who unfortunately passed of COVID in 2020. He was a world-renowned martial artist and also one of the co-founders of the school that I served as principal of. The picture directly above that, where it says, welcome to the Know Thyself Peace and Unity Community Garden, is a community garden that we started at the school on the east side of Detroit. In the community, we did it in conjunction with two community groups, two community councils. And the brother in the picture with me in the white shirt is named Shaka Senghor, and he is now, this was 1 week after he had gotten out of prison. He had been in prison for murder for, I think, about 18 years, and this is a week after he gotten out. And so he came to visit me. We had corresponded. In fact, I worked with a group that was doing prisoner support work. So when he got out, he came to visit us, and we took this picture. But Shaka Senghor is now a New York Times best-selling author. He has a very famous book out called Righting My Wrongs, W-R-I-G-H-T. I'm sorry, no, W-R-I-T-I-N-G, Righting My Wrongs, talking about his development as a writer and how that really helped him to reform himself while in prison. If you might have heard of a hip-hop artist named Nas. If you heard of him, throw your hands up. Okay, cool. So one of Nas's last albums, I can't remember which one. He's been dropping quite a few lately. King's Disease 1, was it? One of them, I can't remember which one. But the very last song, Shaka Senghor is on, and he's reciting something. So if you want to go back and listen to that. But just watching this brother's evolution has been incredible. But these were gardens that we were doing through in Sodoma Institute. We realized by 2006 that we needed a larger envelope to contain the work, that we needed to move outside of the bounds of the school we are operating within. And we also realized that in Detroit, which is a city that at that time was probably 82, 83% African American. In fact, sometimes we say Detroit is the blackest city in North America. And what we mean by that is that Detroit has the largest percentage of black people of the total population of any large city in the United States. Now, the fact of the matter is, and I get in arguments with my friends from Brooklyn about this, but the fact of the matter is there are more black people in Brooklyn than there are in Detroit, but they're a smaller percentage of the total population. So when we say we're the blackest city in North America, that's what we mean by that. But at the time, in 2005, just before we started our organization, all of the major groups that were doing work that was considered food justice or urban agriculture were white-led nonprofits. Now, having come from this background of self-determining black people who say black people need to be self-reliant, we need to do for ourselves, that if there's white people in our community, we can accept them as allies, but they need to follow the leadership of black people. Having come from that kind of background, watching all these white people leading the urban ag movement in Detroit was not gonna fly with us. And so we created the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network so that not only would black Detroiters play a role in the food movement, but we would be in the leadership of it since we're the vast majority of the population. So it was then and continues to be our view that the most effective movements grow organically out of the communities that they're designed to serve, as opposed to this kind of parachute model that is rooted in the system of white supremacy that suggests to white people that they have the answers in terms of what's best not only for themselves, but also for everybody else. Neither of those things usually turn out to be true, frankly. Although our organization is called the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, we actually realized several years ago that really what we're fighting for is food sovereignty. And this is my friend Raj Patel, who once said to me, "You can have food security in prison." I was like, oh man, yeah, that's true. So clearly we're struggling for something larger than that. Food security means that people have enough calories, they have enough food in their stomach, they're not hungry. And while that should be a bar that all of us in American society should meet, that's a very low bar. And so as we began to study more, in fact, the first time I heard this term was from some First Nations people in Vancouver, in Canada, British Columbia. And as I began to study this term, which has been advanced by La Via Campesina, an international peasant organization, they began to talk about that we don't just want to make sure we have enough food, we want to control the food system. We want to take control from the corporate sector, and we want to make sure that the people who are producing the food and consuming the food are shaping that food system. And so we realize that really what we're struggling for is food sovereignty. We are in the process of changing the name of our organization from the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network to the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. In Mali in 2007, there was a conference in which this definition was advanced of food sovereignty. I'm not going to read that to you. You can read it to yourself. I'll pause for just a minute. So what do we do? Let me get into the specifics. there was a quote by Bell Hooks that I saw today at the Sankofa Orchard, and I'm paraphrasing. And it said, it's not so much about what you say or what you believe, it's about what you do. And that really resonated with me. So let me talk, I've talked to you about what I believe. Now let me talk about what we actually do. How do those beliefs manifest themselves in the real world? We operate the 7-acre D-Town Farm, which is the largest contiguous farm in the city of Detroit. I'm told recently that there's another farm called Pingree Farm, which is run by some white people, and I'm not anti-white people, let me say that also, because sometimes people mistake that. I'm anti-white supremacy. In fact, white supremacy has no safe quarter with me. But if you are a white person who is also working to dismantle white supremacy, we cool. We can be cool. If you are a white supremacy defender, we probably ain't gonna be too cool. So there's a farm run by some white people, and I'm not saying that to throw shade on them. I'm just saying it as a descriptor. Then I'm told it's 15 acres, but it's not contiguous. It's kind of spread out throughout the east side of the city of Detroit. But, you know, it's not a competition. It's not about who has the biggest farm anyway. So, again, these are just things to kind of describe what we're doing, not to rank us. So we are intentionally building black food sovereignty at D-Town Farm. Again, it's a 7-acre farm. It's in a city park. We have what's called a license agreement with the city to utilize that land. It was a long, arduous process to get that license agreement in place, but we've had it in place since 2008, and we've been farming at this one location continuously since that time. By the way, we had 2 locations prior to that, one in 2006, one in 2007. I don't really have time now to talk about what happened to those locations, but we wound up at Rouge Park in 2008. This, by the way, is our board president. That's Dr. Shakira Tyler. She's an up-and-coming superstar in the food movement. I want to put her on your radar, Dr. Shakira Tyler, a brilliant woman from Philadelphia originally. She is now a Detroiter. We've captured her. We're claiming her. Brilliant woman, got her PhD in studying agrarian pedagogy or some big, you know all them terms y'all use in the university. I tease her because she has this big, long title. When I ask her, what's your dissertation? She's, oh, it's about the pedagogy of agrarian, this, that. Okay, all right. So you studying how people teach farming? Is that what you said? But again, a brilliant woman. I want to put her on your radar. At D-Town Farm, we grow actually more than 40 different fruits, vegetables, and herbs. I want to point out this picture. This is one of our founding members, Jackie Hunt, who also passed in 2020 because of COVID. Detroit was hit tremendously hard by COVID. And you know what came to light across the country is that the pre-existing social inequities were magnified once COVID hit a community. And so because of all of the inequities caused by race and economics, Detroit was hit tremendously hard. There were several people that I knew who passed. It wasn't some distant thing. These were people I was close to, people who were friends, people who were our comrades, people who worked with us. So Mama Jackie passed in 2020. But she's standing in a field, she's standing in a field of collard greens. And I don't know if this is true or not, but there's been a rumor circulating around Detroit for a few years that the collard greens from D-Town Farm are the sweetest in the city. I think it is true. I don't know absolutely, but I'm pretty sure it is true. No disrespect to the other farmers in the city, but I'm just saying. But we grow many other things too. Potatoes, callaloo, we were talking about callaloo earlier, or green amaranth. And so how many people have had callaloo before? All right. So some people have been to Jamaica, I'm sure, right? To the Caribbean in general. So, and callaloo means different things in different parts of the Caribbean too, let me say that. Haitian callaloo is not the same thing as Jamaican callaloo. Trinidadian callaloo is not the same thing as Jamaican callaloo. But Jamaican callaloo is prized. And so it's actually a type of amaranth, and we're trying to find kind of niche crops that not every farm in the city has. So we've been growing callaloo for several years, and it can grow pretty tall, and it's abundant, and we get great harvest from it. And then all kinds of stuff, watermelons, peppers, and of course, my beloved Yes, we grow kale. But also, in addition to the food that we grow, we're really growing people's consciousness. And so, for many people in an urban area, well, most of us in America are totally disconnected from the source of our food. But in an urban area like Detroit, people are really disconnected from the whole process. You know, many people don't know what Brussels sprouts look like growing, for example. I didn't know till maybe 10 years ago when I was like, whoa, that's how they look? How many people have seen Brussels sprouts grow before on the stalk? Okay, everybody in here, almost. But, you know, people are disconnected. Oh, potatoes grow on the ground? What? You know, I mean, we're disconnected from the process. We go to a supermarket, we buy things, we don't think about where it originated. So one of the things that we do is we're exposing people to agriculture. And I want to show you the short video clip. This is some young men from the city of Detroit who came out to our farm. I think this was in October. And hopefully this clip will work.
So you pull it back.
What's up, man? What we doing?
I want a bigger one, though. I want a bigger one. Yo, that's me, bro. That's me. Nah, bro. I work hard for this.
Y'all can take
What's the water at? I want to try it.
just brush it off with your hand.
So you can kind of see their thrill because they've never seen radishes grow before, and they're pulling out and seeing what this is. So this is part of our job, really, to expose people to agriculture. But also another part, an important part of our job, is there's a lot of trauma among African people, and not just African people, also. I learned this from a sister from Mexico, but let me tell you about African people first, and I'll tell you about the sister from Mexico. There's a lot of trauma associated with our history of being enslaved and our labor being exploited to create white wealth in this country. And so there are many black people who don't want to have anything to do with agriculture because we associate it. In fact, Leah Penniman says the land was the scene of the crime. And so we want to distance ourselves from that. But there's another problem, and this is a global problem, and that is that agrarian work or working with the soil is not seen as being as valuable as intellectual work. And so there are very few people who raise children and say to their son, Johnny, I want you to grow up and be a farmer, right? Even farmers, for the most part, aren't telling their children that because it's so difficult to make a living doing that. And so there's some class implications in that we need to examine as we're thinking about how we create a more fair and just food system. One of the things that we do annually is a harvest festival because although we have big campaigns to get people to come out and volunteer with us and put their hands in the soil, we realize it ain't for everybody, right? You know, some people get off on that and some people like, nah, that ain't me. Okay, well, that's fine. You know, there's all kind of things you can do to create justice besides farming. But many of those people, although they may not come out and farm with us, they will come out to a harvest festival and hear bands play, hear speakers, have food demonstrations, ride horse. They like that kind of thing. They like the idea of urban farming. Sometimes I tell people, in fact, urban farming is great on a PowerPoint presentation. So this is the flyer from the, I think this was our 16th or something annual harvest festival this past fall. We sell our food, and you know there's a lot of debate about what urban farms should do with the food that they grow. And some farms grow food to give away to people. I heard Duran say today that if people are hungry, they can come in and they can get food, and that's cool. Another aspect of it, though, is that we're really trying to create an economy, a self-determined economy, where we can provide jobs and employment and create an economically robust situation in our communities through the selling of food. And so we don't give a lot of food away. And you know, some people are critical of that. We don't give a lot of food away because we want to attach some value to it. And so mostly what we do is we sell our food at a farm stand in front of our farm on Saturdays and Sundays. And then there's a market, a farmer's market at Wayne State University in the center of the city that we sell at on Wednesdays. When I asked Duran, you know, kind of about the environment here in Richmond and what he thought would be valuable for me to say, he stressed to me that it was important to talk about collaboration and how we built collaboration in Detroit. And so I want to talk about this one example of collaboration that I think is very important and might be able to be replicated to some degree here in Richmond. And that is something that is called the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund. Let me back up just a bit and say that when we founded the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network in 2006, we were striving to create an umbrella under which we could bring all of the black folks who were doing farming in the city under one umbrella to work in some kind of unified force. That didn't happen, to be truthful. We became another organization. And although we have, 100 members or so, and 3 or 4 of those members are organizations, for the most part, we're not the network that we envisioned becoming. However, in 2020, a brilliant sister by the name of Tefira Rushdan had an idea to create, for Juneteenth Day, to do a fundraiser in order to raise $5,000 to help black farmers in Detroit purchase land. Well, this thing was so wildly successful that she decided to continue it. And it is now run jointly by 3 organizations, one called Keep Growing Detroit, of which Tefira Rushdan is the co-executive director, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, which I am the executive director of, and Oakland Avenue Urban Farm. It's run by 4 black women, and this is one, Dr. Shakira Tyler, who I told you about earlier. This is another one. She's another board member of our organization, Erin Johnson. And then I don't see the other 2. I don't see Tefira or the sister who runs Oakland Avenue Urban Farm in this. But what they have been successful in doing in running this program for a little more than 2 years now is giving grant money to more than 70 black farmers in the city of Detroit to be able to purchase land or to buy infrastructure on the land. And so they have been able to really build this network that we set out to build in the beginning. Big ups to black women, okay? So sometime in the next couple of months, the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund is going to be absorbed into the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. All of the leaders of the Land Fund feel that it's best placed within the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. So it'll still have the collaborative nature to it, but it will be housed under the organization that I currently lead. By the way, let me say this, that I am about, I think I said this last night to somebody, 10 months and 20 days from going out on sabbatical for a year and then retiring after that. So part of what we're doing is we are passing the mantle, and our organization, because we understand how patriarchy functions, and the fact that I'm standing here speaking before you today has a lot to do with the fact that I'm a man, frankly. I want to own that, right? And so we're intentionally trying to fight against that. And so we are promoting women in leadership in our organization. We're moving from an individual directorship to a co-directorship. I can't say for sure who those co-directors will be because I don't make the choice, but I'm pretty sure that Dr. Shakira is going to be one of them, and I'm advocating for her to be one of those co-executive directors. So we're bringing the Detroit Farmer Land Fund, Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, under the auspices of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. Maybe during the Q&A, if you have more questions about that, I'd be glad to go into more detail. We also have a youth program. We actually have 2 youth programs. When I was a youngster, 1969, 1970, a young revolutionary, and young revolutionaries think they know everything, let me tell you that, right? I don't know if you ever met a young revolutionary before, but they know young people in general tend to think they know everything about everything, right? And as I've gotten older, I realized, damn, I don't know nothing about nothing, right? Everything I thought I knew, I don't really know. So, but one of the things that we thought, early in my revolutionary career was that in the next 2 or 3 years, the revolution was going down, right? And that black people go be free and society was going to be transformed. Now, it wasn't just like wild thinking, because the possibility actually did exist that would happen. If it hadn't been for the suppression of COINTELPRO and the murdering of black leaders and imprisoning black leaders, that might have actually happened. But still, we were somewhat short-sighted And we didn't realize that the process of transforming society is not only a protracted process. In fact, the great African-American author John Oliver Killen said we need long-distance runners, right? We good for the sprint, right? You know, some jump off, police kill somebody, we like, for about 6 weeks, and then Peter's out, business as usual. So not only do we need long-distance runners and realize our movement is protracted, but it's also intergenerational. So now having a bit more maturity and hopefully a bit more wisdom at 67 than I had at 13, we now know that we have to be intentional about bringing young people into the movement. That if our movement for food justice and food sovereignty is to be sustainable, not only do we have to use sustainable growing techniques, but we have to make sure that the movement itself is sustainable by intentionally, constantly bringing young people into it. And so that's the main purpose of our youth program, the Food Warriors Youth Development Program. It is run by my very brilliant sister, Mama Hanifa Ajuman, who I also want to put on your radar. Brilliant, 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 brilliant sister, hardworking sister. She would be a great person to bring to speak at some point in the future as well. So this program operates at 3 locations in the city of Detroit, 2 schools and 1 church. In fact, she's a member of a church called the Shrine of the Black Madonna. Some of you might have heard of it. They have churches in Detroit, Houston, and Atlanta. It's a church with a liberation theology. The program teaches young people how to build and maintain raised bed gardens, how to harvest that food, and how to prepare it in healthy ways. Also, it teaches them food justice concepts, and everything that we do is rooted in the understanding that African American people have to understand how we fit into our own cultural and historical continuum. And so everything we do is what we call African-centered. It is designed to get African people to put ourselves at the center of our own lives, of our own consciousness. And so children are learning how to plant kale, but they're also learning about Dr. George Washington Carver. They learn how to plant collard greens, but they're also learning about the yam festivals in West Africa. And so this photo was taken at what's called the Barack Obama Leadership Academy, one of the schools on the east side of Detroit where we run our youth program. And I'm hating a little bit. I know you're not supposed to hate on children, right? So I'm gonna say up front, I know this is wrong, you know, and I know you're not supposed to hate on children, but I'm hating a little bit because the garlic that the children grew that year was bigger and more robust than the garlic that us so-called expert farmers at D-Town Farm grew. So, you know, I guess that's the goal. You want the student to surpass the teacher, right? And so in this case, they certainly did. We have a second program that also is run by the mighty Mama Hanifa, which is called Food and Flavor. And this is like the hip hop spelling, right? So this is for teenagers. And it does essentially the same thing as the program for the younger children, the elementary children, except we combine entrepreneurial skills with this. And so they learn how to produce value-added products and sell those. There was a great philosopher and hip-hop artist who once said, if it don't make money, it don't make sense. Anybody ever heard that before? And so I found, especially with teenagers, that when they see how urban agriculture can put some money in their pocket, all of a sudden it starts making a whole lot more sense than it did before that. And so that's how this program functions. They learn how to produce value-added products, how to sell them. So these youth that were in the program this year sold teas that they produced at our Harvest Festival. Each one of them walked away with $80 in their pocket. And all of a sudden, urban agriculture is a pretty cool thing for them. Big project that we're working on that is rapidly becoming our largest project is the Detroit Food Commons. We've been working on this project for 13 years now. And we started out wanting to have a food co-op, and we wanted to have a food co-op because we are an anti-capitalist organization. You know, I've already kind of talked about some of the reasons capitalism is bad. I don't really have enough time to go into all of the things right now. But cooperatives are a way of kind of breaking the monopoly that capitalism has on our minds and moving people in the direction of seeing that we have a collective destiny and that we need to work cooperatively and collectively to achieve that destiny. So that's one of the reasons that we're dedicated to cooperatives. So we, along with a development partner called Develop Detroit Incorporated, are leading the development of this building. This is the architect's rendition of what it will look like when it's complete. The Detroit Food Commons will house on the first floor the Detroit People's Food Co-op. We currently have 1,804 member owners of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. Member owners have paid or are in the process of paying $200 to buy a share of ownership in the business. Now, this isn't like Sam's Club, where you can get a membership at Sam's Club and it gives you the opportunity to go spend your money at Sam's Club, right? This is where you are an actual owner of the business and you get to have say-so in shaping the business, particularly in this period prior to us opening the doors when there's 1,000 different decisions that have to be made. We have community members meeting constantly, thinking about things like, what is the product line going to be? What are the policies? What are the health benefits we're going to offer to employees? Community members are shaping these things. There's not outside people coming in telling us what to do. People are working in cooperation with each other to make these determinations. On the second floor of the building, we'll have the Kuji Chagulia Kitchens, or the Kuji Kitchens for short, and Imani Hall, named after one of my teachers, Mama Imani Humphrey, who was a pillar in an institution building pillar in the city of Detroit. And that's a 3,000 square foot hall where we can have lectures, film screenings, community meetings, and the like. And then the offices of our organization are also moving into that building. We broke ground on April 23rd last year, and I can tell you after 12 years of working on this, there were all kind of rumors floating through the community that it would never happen. And let me tell you this, that the reality is that part of what the system of white supremacy has done is that it instills within black people and other people of color that we somehow have diminished capabilities, that white people have some monopoly on defining reality, and that, you know, we can't do that. We can't, you know, somebody more powerful needs to come in, a corporation, the government, somebody needs to do it. So we broke ground on April 23rd, and of course we silenced all the naysayers. You know, people have been saying, oh, this is a scam, they're stealing people's money, it's never gonna happen, all of these kinds of things. So again, you know, we silenced all of that when we broke ground on April 23rd of last year. Again, this is the mighty Mama Hanifa conducting a vermi compost workshop at the groundbreaking. This is Angela Lugo Thomas, a sister originally from Puerto Rico, or Boricua, who is on the board of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. And these are members of the staff and board of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network at the groundbreaking. I think I have another video clip I'm going to hopefully show. This is on December 21st of last year.
Watch it close it in, things like Well, as you can hear, they're finishing nailing down our roof up there.
So it's a dream becoming a reality. This is a picture that this is a photo that was taken on January 21st. And so I put these kind of one above the other so you can see the architect's rendition and you can see how that rendition is actually coming into being. I sent somebody that picture, they say, oh, it looks just like the drawing. It's like, yeah, exactly. So construction will be finished in October of this year. The Detroit People's Food Co-op and the Detroit Food Commons will open before this calendar year is over. I want to switch gears and I want to kind of move a little bit quicker so I can get through the presentation. So while the most important work is local work, we have to work right where we are. And you know, some people say all politics is local. But also the systems that keep us oppressed are not local. What happens in Detroit is not unique to Detroit. It also happens in Richmond. In fact, how capitalists work, there's a playbook, and they try it in Brooklyn. Oh, okay, that worked in Brooklyn. Let's try it in Detroit. And then the same thing kind of plays out throughout the country and throughout the world, for that matter. And so one of the things that Malcolm advised us on is to internationalize our struggle. I'll talk about the international aspects in a minute. But it's very important that we also work together on a national basis. So I'm one of the 3 co-founders of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, and this is the great and mighty Fannie Lou Hamer. There's a mural of her at the Sankofa Orchard. If you haven't been out there to see it, make sure that how many people have been to the Sankofa Orchard, by the way? Okay, good. So about half the folks here. The other half, make it a point to see Deron and make an arrangement to get out there and see the Sankofa Orchard, but not just see it, but to support it. And Sister Anna, is that right? You're the co-farm manager, is that right? Throw your hands up so they can see who you are. Okay, check in with her. Check in with her. Make an arrangement to get out there and see what's going on. But this is Fannie Lou Hamer, and the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, as this slide says, is a coalition of black-led organizations developing black leadership, supporting black communities, organizing black self-determination, and building institutions for black food sovereignty and liberation. The National Black Food and Justice Alliance does several things, including convening black co-op developers throughout the country. So, we're developing a co-op in Detroit, but we're part of a cohort of about 20 other black co-op developers throughout the country who all meet on a regular basis and share information, share contacts, so that we're not all doing this as, individual projects. The Alliance also is very heavily involved in addressing black land loss. Savvy Horn of the Black Land Loss Prevention Center in North Carolina is on the leadership team of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. The Alliance is establishing agroecology centers, and I'll talk in just a minute about the first one that was established at FAMU in November, and also influencing public policy. The Justice for Black Farmers Act that was initiated by Senator Cory Booker was advised by members of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. In fact, in particular, Leah Penniman and other members of the Alliance who met with Senator Booker's staff to craft the wording for the Justice for Black Farmers Act, which unfortunately was derailed by white farmers who felt that in some way it was discriminating against them. But the struggle ain't over. They're still advancing this act and trying to get it passed. One of the miraculous things about the National Black Food and Justice Alliance is that often black organizations don't make it past the first generation of charismatic leadership. And so I am so happy to say that the National Black Food and Justice Alliance in 2002, our initial executive director, Dara Cooper, resigned and was replaced by, or I shouldn't say replaced by, the leadership became a co-directorship with Dr. Jasmine Jackson, keep her name on your minds, please, and also Cicely Garrett. They are the 2 co-executive directors of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. So the fact that we were able to move to the second generation of black leadership is extremely important. These are some of the members of the leadership team here. This is Brother Carlton Turner, who runs SIP Culture right outside of Jackson, Mississippi. This is Mama Iya, who's also in Jackson. This is my friend Mark. Forgive me, his last name is escaping me right now. Who's in Brooklyn? Who I often argue with about, when I say Detroit's the blackest city, he's usually the one that bucks up a little bit. Mama Dorothy, who's in North Carolina, Operation Spring Plant. This is Brother Fred, who is in Illinois, in a city outside of Chicago, which is a traditionally black farming town, which is under attack. This is Tasha Phoenix in St. Louis, and Savvy Horn, who I mentioned earlier, out of North Carolina, who does work on black land loss prevention. These are some of the direct action campaigns that the Alliance has been involved in. This is in Pembroke, Illinois, the community that Baba Fred is from that I was talking about. There's a pipeline that people are attempting to put through there, so there's been direct action to try to stop that. Also, we've been involved in hearings related to black farmers trying to hold on to their land. It's also important that people who are engaged in transforming society study. And so the National Black Food and Justice Alliance has a book club. These are 2 of the books that the book club has studied. Freedom Farmers by Dr. Monica White, who also is from Detroit and was formerly the board president of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. And this is another book, Hammer and Hoe, by Robin DJ Kelly. The Alliance also has what's called a Mutual Aid Resource and Capacity Fund that in 2020, 2021 gave out more than $1 million to the members of our Alliance to help them both address the COVID crisis and to build their capacity to provide food for their communities. In November, the first of several agroecology centers opened at Florida A&M University, and it's called the Lola Hampton Frank Pender Center for Agroecology at FAMU. And Lola Hampton and Frank Pender were two black farmers in Florida in the Tallahassee area, and they deemed that it was important to name the center after them. This is my friend Dr. Kwazi Densu, who is the co-director of the Agroecology Center at FAMU, and this is Dr. Jennifer Taylor, who is the co-director of the Agroecology Center at FAMU. This is my good sister Dara Cooper, who is the co-founder, along with me and Beatrice Beckford, of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, and served as its first executive director. Sabby Horn, who I've talked about a couple times, and Dr. Monica White, who wrote the important book, Freedom Farmers. So, as I said earlier, Malcolm X advised us that we had to internationalize our struggle, that the ills, social ills and economic ills that we're faced with in the United States are part of a global system, and that if we're going to really attack this, we have to do it on a global basis. We have to build solidarity among peoples across the world who are working for food sovereignty, justice, and liberation. And so this year I nominated a group called Food Sovereignty Ghana for the annual Food Sovereignty Award that is given out by the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance. And they give out two awards annually. One is a domestic award, one is a national award. And so the domestic award was given to the Western Organization of Resource Councils, and the international award was given to the Food Sovereignty Ghana. Because I nominated Food Sovereignty Ghana, they asked me to MC the program where the awards were given, which I did. This is my brother Anan Laloli, who is originally from Guyana in South America and has resided in Toronto, Ontario since the 1980s. I actually met him in the early 1980s because I'm a musician and I was playing in a reggae band that played in Toronto often. He's a musician that played in Toronto, in Canada's top reggae band at the time called Truths and Rights. We really connected around music in the early 1980s, and then we didn't reconnect again until we kind of lost track until the late 1990s. And I was about to walk on stage at a festival to play, and he was standing by the stairs, and we kind of reconnected. And then as we started talking, he introduced me to this term called food sovereignty, food security at the time. And then he told me about an organization called the Community Food Security Coalition. And that really was my first entree into the food movement. So in many ways, I stand on his shoulders. He's been doing incredible work in Toronto, and work that really needs to be studied, because they have gotten the government, the municipal government of Toronto, first to create an office of anti-black racism. I don't know any municipal government in the United States that has even the courage to use that kind of terminology and to recognize that anti-black racism is endemic in American society. But the government of Toronto has recognized this and created an office of anti-black racism, and part of that is they have created a Toronto Black Food Sovereignty Working Group, which my brother Anan Laloli heads. There's a lot of documentation on the internet about the work that they're doing. I want to put that on your radar and have you look into that. These are some of the things that happened late last year. They have all kinds of things, all kinds of activities, some of which are, pretty safe things like cooking, cooking demonstrations by people from the African world, but also all kinds of community conversations that they have to involve people. And you can see we're kind of connecting the dots. So we have Dr. Jasmine Ratcliffe of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance that spoke at this Toronto Black Food Sovereignty gathering, and then also Kweku Bafor of Food Sovereignty Ghana. So when we make these connections, we start linking them all up together so that we have a movement. Also in November, Anan was invited to go to Montreal in Quebec, the French-speaking part of Canada, and he asked me to join, and so we are helping to facilitate the development of a Black Food Sovereignty Working Group in Quebec. I want to end by talking about a trip I took in late November, early December of last year. I was invited to attend a conference in Yaoundé, Cameroon. I flew from Detroit to Paris and from Paris to Yaoundé. Let me tell you just a bit about Cameroon, and we'll approach the end of this in just a minute. Cameroon, as all African countries, perhaps with the exception of Ethiopia, are really European creations. That all of the national boundaries that we now know on the African continent were created as a result of European colonialism. Often those boundaries had nothing to do with the ethnic groups who lived within those boundaries. In fact, oftentimes ethnic groups lived on both sides of the boundaries, or sometimes ethnic groups that had tensions between them were kind of lumped together within these created national boundaries. And so the same is true with Cameroon. It's also true that many European countries, when they came to West Africa, they named the area after the resource they were trying to exploit. And so if you look on old maps, you'll see something called the Slave Coast near what is now called Nigeria. Nigeria is a name that was created also, and which there's various rumors about how it originated. I won't go into that. You know about Ghana was called the Gold Coast before its independence in 1958 or 57, whichever year that was. And there's still a country called Côte d'Ivoire, which in English means the Ivory Coast. So European countries would name areas after the resource they were trying to exploit. Cameroon takes its name from the Portuguese Rio de Camaros, or river of shrimp, because the shrimp were in abundance and it's something that they valued. So you've probably heard about the notorious Berlin Conference that occurred in 1884 and 85, where Chancellor Bismarck, I think his name was, I can't remember the exact name, called this conference because European countries were in competition with each other over who would have rights to exploit resources from the African continent. And so as a result of that, the German colonization of Cameroon was formalized at the Berlin Conference in 1884. However, when the Germans lost World War II, they lost their so-called possessions. And so Cameroon became a mandate, what the League of Nations at that time called a mandate, and they gave the majority of it to the French to administer and a small strip of it near Nigeria to the English to administer. By 1961, both French and English Cameroon had become so-called independent, politically independent. There's been a president in power since 1982, the same president, Paul Biya. The country has about 27 million people. The Bamileke are about a quarter of the population, and the other 75% are divided among 8 other ethnic groups. There's currently a civil war raging in Cameroon among some of the English-speaking people who are adjacent to Nigeria, and the majority French-speaking people who the English-speaking folks feel are getting inordinate access to resources, jobs, so on and so forth. Many of them, after protesting in 2017 and being met with violence by the Cameroonian government, declared themselves the Federal Republic of Ambazonia. And there is currently a civil war going on. They even have a Facebook page, if you want to find out, at least from the perspective of the party line, about Ambazonia. You can go on Facebook and check that out. So I got there in late at night on the 27th of November. This is a monument that's right in the city because it's a bilingual country. They have this, I love my country, Cameroon, in both English and French. The conference that I went to was the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, their 4th biennial food systems conference, and the theme was mobilizing African food policy and action for healthy food systems. On the first day of the conference, they asked people to wear, and by the way, let me say this, there were 170 people attending from 30 different African countries. On the first day of the conference, they asked people to wear what they call traditional costume. And so this picture that you see is a sister from Togo in her traditional wear, and a brother from Tanzania wearing some of his traditional garb. Now, as an African descendant person in America, this presented quite a dilemma for me because I wasn't sure if I should wear the tattered clothing of my enslaved ancestors a zoot suit, or some Timbs and a hoodie. So I ended up dressing kind of like how I do every day, a dashiki and some black jeans, and it worked out fine. At that conference, a major campaign was kicked off that in French is called Je mange africain, in English, my food is African. One of the symptoms of the system of white supremacy, as I mentioned earlier, is that people seem to think that things from the United States or from Europe are innately better. In fact, when I was growing up, some people would jokingly say the white man's ice is colder. Has anybody ever heard that before? Yeah, you heard that? Okay. So, you know, we still have this mentality, both in the United States and throughout the world, where white people are almost worshipped. And so what we see now is traditional African foods being devalued. Many of those foods are actually much more resilient to the kind of climate change that we're seeing, and also are more nutritious. But they're not as prestigious as burgers and pizzas and fries. And so they kicked off this program to try to get African people really to embrace traditional foods. They also were urging a comprehensive African policy. You might know that Africa is 54 different countries with 54 different food policies. And of course, all of those national boundaries are artificial. And so they are striving for a more unified policy that affects the entire African continent. The attendees at the conference were about evenly divided between Francophone Africans, French-speaking Africans, and Anglophone Africans, English-speaking Africans. They asked people attending the conference to bring various foods from the countries they attended, they came from, and there were various things on display. This is just something that I had never seen before: popped sorghum, roasted cowpeas, and there are many other things that were on display at the conference that are being produced and packaged on the African continent. This is a brother I met that I was very impressed with, named Nan Fak from Cameroon, who actually runs a cooperative. There's a short video I'm going to play, and he's going to talk about what he does.
Okay, good morning. My name is Nanfak. I'm a CEO of Taang. Taang is a cooperative located in the Western Highland of Cameroon. We are engaged in sustainable agriculture, food and herb systems. We produce seeds and medicinal plants for different purposes. Like you can see here, we have a very large varieties of peasant seeds coming from our different organic garden in the Western Highland of Cameroon. We are especially situated in Menoa Division. And you have also, we produce yearly around more than 500 varieties of plants, including fruits, medicinal plants, leafy vegetables, root and tubers, and etc. And we process the large quantity of what we produce into manufactured products. This, for example, the honey, this is the natural honey, because we also do beekeeping in our different agroforestry systems. And we have also strawberry juice. Yes, so that is strawberry seed, and from strawberry seed we germinate and make strawberry seedlings. Those strawberry seeds can be either planted in our garden or sell in the local market. We also grow strawberries that we harvest to process it into strawberry juice. Yes, this is a fantastic product. And you have also many other medicinal plants like Desmodium tea, eucalyptus tea, physalis, Artemisia. This Artemisia annua is a very interesting medicinal plant used to treat malaria. Yes. It's very efficient. So we are into biodiversity and everything that we do is purely organic.
He's 26 years old, by the way. So speakers at the conference addressed a variety of topics. Again, you can read that. These are some of the folks. The woman at the top, the woman at the top was the head of an organization called CNOP, which in English translates to the National Organization of Farmers. And they were the kind of the hosting organization. The brother below her is a farmer from northern Ghana, and then some of the key figures, some of the key officers in AFSA. On the second day, we went to a center that teaches agroecology and vocational skills in a city called Mayfo. And we were welcomed by the mayor and by some traditional drumming and dancing. When we got to the center, we were welcomed by some children who were also doing dancing for us. They were actually dancing to some recorded music. These are some of the scenes at the center. This brother is the director of the center. He was showing us some of the agriculture projects there. These are plantains, actually, that are growing. This is terrace gardening. And if you think gardening on flat land is difficult, try gardening on the side of a hill. I'm standing in a field of bananas and beans where they're intercropping, and this is a fish pond where they're raising fish. While we were out touring the facility, they had asked several of the participants in the conference in advance to come prepare traditional foods from their particular region. And so these are some of the folks who were preparing foods. This is a sister from Uganda, sister from Kenya here. These folks here are from Uganda, sister here from Senegal preparing the national dish of Senegal. Anybody been to Senegal before? What's the national dishes? Are you from Senegal? What's the national dish in Senegal? Do you know? Cheboudjen, yes. Fish and rice, rice and fish, so that's what she's preparing, thank you. And this brother here, we developed a strong bond in the center at the bottom. He's from Zimbabwe, and he does what he calls African fusion cooking. So he takes traditional Zimbabwe dishes and kind of puts a twist on them with things from other cultures. Let's see. So Bridget, what are you up to?
This is the Ugandan stall. Our food is out there cooking, about to get ready. I cook matoke, potatoes. We are going to prepare the sauce now. You need to see how we prepare it. Yeah. In banana leaves and brown nuts. So in Uganda, we don't cook one food in a meal. We cook several foods. So there we have the banana, sweet potatoes, plantain, brown nuts, beef, fish. It's all for one meal. That's how we cook our food, everything. But we cook it in one pot. So we save, we save the fire. We don't use a lot of firewood. So the food is in one pot, the sauce in one pot. Yeah, now she's going to prepare the sauce.
This is what I'm going to use to prepare the sauce. I'm going to have beef stew in here. I'm going to have some fish stew in here. A little bit of different stews, but all of them are going in one saucepan and using one stove.
Have you already brought it back?
The what?
The one you were steaming. Where?
So it might have been a little difficult to understand what they were saying, but one of the most important things they were saying is in Uganda, they prepare all the foods on one fire as a way of saving firewood. A lot of times we think these ideas of sustainability are new. They're not. They're actually very, very old. We also gathered that night. We had, after they finished cooking everything, we had this wonderful Pan-African feast. I mentioned earlier that although I started out my life eating chitlins, and now I'm a vegan, a very strict vegan. And usually when I travel in Africa, I have a kind of challenging time. But this particular night, I had no challenge, and there were all kinds of plant-based things that I could put on my plate. This is a picture of my plate that night, and that's a description of what was on my plate. On the third day of the conference, the last day, I had the honor of being able to address the conference. In fact, I got on the same joint I had on now, right? Hey. So I was the only so-called African-American at the conference. In fact, I was the only Western Hemispheric African at the conference, so I felt like I had a tremendous obligation. You know, I feel like in a sense I'm representing like, you know, all of us, the whole of we. So I reminded folks that the idea of Pan-Africanism actually began in the Western Hemisphere, primarily in the Caribbean, people like Henry Sylvester Williams from Trinidad, and that many of the African leaders who were anti-colonial leaders and became leaders of their countries after independence really learned about this idea of Pan-Africanism from black folks in the Western Hemisphere, either by going to school in London or what have you. So I just wanted to affirm the role of African people in the so-called Western Hemisphere as part of the African world, and that as we're moving, we need to think in a global Pan-African way. These were some of the folks I met from various parts of the African continent. I made some dynamic connections. I won't go into who all these folks are. I will say this, that this brother here, Milyam Bilay, is the general coordinator of AFSA, or what we would call executive director in the United States. And this brother, Chris McCool, is the outgoing board president of AFSA. But the most promising connection I made with this brother, Karubel Tadele. And he's from Ethiopia, but he happens to live in the United States. He lives in Dallas. And so I think he's going to be key, and has already been key, in connecting the Black food sovereignty movement in the United States with the Black food sovereignty movement in the continent of Africa. In fact, just last weekend, he attended a meeting in Dallas of the Dallas Black Food Sovereignty Network, a group that in some ways I think is modeling themselves after what we're doing in the city of Detroit. Then for the last few days, I got a chance to hang out in them streets. And so, so these are pictures of me hanging out in the streets of Yaoundé. This one picture is actually on the top of a mountain overlooking the city. And although I might look strong and brave in the picture, I was actually shaking like a leaf. And trying not to let my host see me say, who this scared American boy up here? I didn't know they have a Pan-African University in Cameroon also. These two brothers attend the Pan-African University. He's from Cameroon, he's from Kenya. The African Union has plans to create multiple Pan-African universities throughout the continent. The first one is in Cameroon, and it's attracting Africans from various parts of the continent. I also had a chance to visit various museums and see various cultural artifacts. I don't really have time to go into detail about that, but I thank you so much for your time. I promised you that I would begin with an ancestor and that I would end with an ancestor. This is Sister Charity Hicks, who is one of the co-founders of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, who went to New York to speak at the Left Forum in 2014. She was standing at a bus stop. A car jumped the curb, hit her. She was in a coma for about a month and passed. We continue to cherish her memory. One of the things she reminded us of that I want to remind you of is to wage love. Thank you.
So thank you again, Baba Malik. Give it up, a round of applause for him again. This is amazing. You know, we said we was gonna rock out from 6 to 9 p.m. It's like 8:45, so I guess we'll leave the last 15 minutes for Q&A and thoughts, feelings, and other remarks from folks in the audience. So I'm gonna do this in the most efficient way that I know how. If anyone has any questions, I'll pass the mic to Baba Malik, whoever, and then we can walk around and, you know, if somebody wanna ask a question, let me know so we can get the mic to you.
Thank you all for coming. Those who are leaving now, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, Baba Malik. My name is Fidelis Folafat.
Say your name again?
Fidelis Folafat.
Where you from?
Cameroon.
Oh, okay, all right.
And yeah, I mean, even before you got to the Cameroon part, my emotions been high the whole time. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Cameroon in my early childhood. Both my parents' side of the families are farmers. My mother's side of the family, her great-grandfather actually ran away from slavery, founded a village. That's how he got into farming. And I recently just started growing my own food myself at my place. I stay in an apartment, but I grow out of grow bags and stuff like that. And just like you, Malcolm X changed my life. His autobiography was the book that changed my life when I was in high school. And so I've been involved in different ways in activism since then. I don't even know where to start, but just, you know, with you going to Cameroon, that's to me, that's something that I've always wanted to go back home and been able to be able to make a change. You know, it's something that I, you know, consider myself a socialist and a Pan-African as well. So I just wanted to know if there were, you know, one, what are different ways that someone like myself can get involved? I recently just moved to Richmond a year and a half ago, but also, you know, with the international efforts, especially in places like Cameroon, if there were any sort of plans or ideas that, you know, had come from your visit there, and I do hope you enjoyed visiting my country as well.
Yeah, I loved my visit to Cameroon. And frankly, every time I go to Africa, I love it. Although, you know, the reality is that there's lots of terrible stuff happening in Africa, and there's lots of great stuff happening. Both are realities simultaneously. But this is what I would suggest, that I didn't go to Cameroon as an individual. I went because I was doing work in Detroit, and then as a result of being immersed in that work in Detroit and connecting with other people, I kind of went as a representative of a group. I didn't just go as an individual. And so my suggestion would be, if you are not already immersed in the black food sovereignty work happening in Richmond, that you do that. That if you, do you know Brother Duran?
No.
Do you know Sister Anna? You see them? I want you to promise that before you walk out of this room, you go connect with them. Okay, and so see how first you can connect here locally. And then as y'all build, you know, maybe then the next time they have a conference, maybe y'all will send a representative to Cameroon, and maybe it'll be you, who knows, you know? But that would be kind of my general suggestion. But also, I'd be glad to put you in touch with the brother in Dallas, who is the communications director of AFSA. And, you know, if there's some way that you can connect and do some meaningful work and I can help facilitate that, I'd be glad to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm
Thank you.
Madeline McClinney. And my quick question, is there armed security for your farm?
No. No, there's not armed security. We are very security conscious, I'll say that. And I'll just share that last year, myself and another brother who worked at the farm, we were getting in the pickup truck, getting ready to leave the farm to go pick up something. And everybody else on the farm, 4 or 5 people who were working, were women there. And actually, they had told me that the day before that, this guy came up to the farm, was just like came in, and we keep usually, not the gate locked, but closed. He just kind of came in, and then he went in one of the hoop houses and started doing some kind of ritual, and they were concerned about it. So the next day I happened to be there, he came back again. And he was getting ready to walk onto the farm. He had 2 pit bulls with him. No, he had 1 pit bull, I'm sorry. And the brother I was riding in the truck with got out of the truck and said, "Brother, you can't bring the dog on the farm." And the guy said, "I own this. I'm indigenous." He had a pit bull on a leash. He had a hatchet in his hand, and he had some nunchucks. And so I see my boy kind of having some words with him. So I said, okay, let me step out of the truck and see if I can intercede in this situation. So I approached the brother, frankly not knowing how that was getting ready to go down. The first thing I'm doing is keeping my eye on the dog. Is the dog vicious about, because I don't have nothing on me except, well, I always have a knife, but other than that, I don't, you know. So I was able to kind of talk the brother down, and he went on and got in his car, and we haven't seen him since. But it pointed out the need for serious security consciousness at our farm. So no, we don't carry guns at the farm, but we do have some procedures in place if something jumps off, how we respond to it and things like that. Yes, ma'am.
I see that as becoming a problem in the near future for these efforts.
You mean like people like putting poison or...
Exactly.
Or,
so there's, for example, a family, and I just moved back to Richmond, but my business is headquartered in Charlotte. There's a family there that has had a spring in his family for 150 years, and they have armed guards.
Yeah, I've heard, there's a farmer also in somewhere in the West, I forgot, that's really been circulating around on Instagram lately. There's been a battle where he and his wife, they've been poisoning the animals and all kind of things like that. So those things are realities, and I'll just say that, we need to respond in appropriate manners. If a pea shooter will do the job, we don't need a bazooka. And so in some cases, maybe we do need the bazooka, but in most cases, probably not. And the thing is, we don't want to turn these spaces that are created for healing and community building into armed camps, because there's multiple functions. There's growing the food, but there's also building the community. So I would just say we need to be security conscious, we need to be trained, we need to be ready to respond to threats on various levels in various ways, and I think I'll just leave it at that. But thank you, I share your concern.
Thank you for sharing.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Deanna McDonald, and I have a question around, you mentioned that this is, I think, your second or third site, and you touched on land ownership and things of that nature, and I wonder, do you own the land, one? And then are you leasing, renting from the city? How does that work? What are your thoughts on that process? Yeah.
Thank you. So first I'll start by saying that I think the whole idea of land ownership is one of the pillars of the bankrupt system of capitalism. That this idea that human beings can own part of the earth is not a universally accepted concept. And as you probably know, when the European colonists came in contact with indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere and with Africans, they didn't have this concept of I can have individual land that I own, that I have a piece of paper that says a deed, that I can pass it on to my usually son. These were not concepts that were part of indigenous cultures. There might have been a king who was the steward of the land for the collective, supposedly, and I'm not defending African kings because a lot of them were totally corrupt also, frankly. I think we have to look at the whole concept of land ownership through two kind of eyes. The first set of eyes is that as we're trying to bring into being a new type of society and new relationships between human beings, we need to move away from this concept of individual private ownership of land. However, in the meantime, ownership of land is the only way that farmers have security, right? And so we kind of have to have a short-term strategy and then a longer-term strategy. And so we have to hold both of those realities simultaneously. So I mentioned during the presentation that we have what's called a license agreement for the 7 acres that we operate. The city of Detroit says they own it. Frankly, I don't buy into that. That's what they say. They gangstered it. They have it because of colonialism, right? Because the French came and took it, with arms from the indigenous people who live there. So, and frankly, that's the same with the whole United States and the whole so-called Western Hemisphere. So I don't acknowledge that in any righteous way they have any claim to ownership of this land. Now, of course, they have laws and police and armies and things that enforce their belief that they own it, and that if you go against that, great harm can come to you. But in my heart of hearts, I don't accept the idea that a human being can own part of the earth. Or even more ludicrous, that a human being can own a lake or an island. This is ridiculous, right? So again, I'm holding both of those realities. In the short term, yes, we need ownership to have security of the land. And in the long term, we need to figure out how we do away with it.
And so then the follow-up is your moving as a result of them revoking licensures and things of that nature, do you have something more permanent in place with the city of Detroit, and what does that look like?
Well, I would suggest that there is nothing permanent in American society because they have something called eminent domain. But we have tried to buy the land from the city. In fact, the argument we made is that they should sell us that land at 8 cents per square foot, which is the same rate that they sold John Hance 1,500 parcels in Detroit. John Hance is this wealthy dude who said he wanted to create first the world's largest urban farm, then he created what's called a tree farm. It's speculation. I don't have time to go into that right now. There's a movie out about it I was telling somebody about last night called Land Grab. It's on one of the streaming services, I forget, but you can Google it and you can kind of get the story of the Hance land grab and how all that transpired. So our argument was, sell us that land at the same price you sold him that land. First they lied and said, well, the deeds from the farmers who originally deeded the land to the city says we can't sell it. We had our legal team do the research, like they say on Jerry Springer. That was a lie, right? And so then they said, well, we got a grant from the state to refurbish the swimming pool that's in the park, and the agreement in this with the state says that we can't sell any of the land. That was a lie. And then finally they just said to us, we're not gonna sell it to you. So, but we are looking for additional land that we can purchase. But I'll share also what I shared with somebody earlier today, that what we try to do is create a dynamic where it would be much too costly for the city to come and to try to evict us. And when I say costly, I mean, we got pretty huge national support and a pretty huge national profile. It would be a very ugly situation if the city of Detroit tried to remove us from that land. And it's easier for them just to leave us alone. So in general, I think that's how we need to proceed, that we need to move with power so that people feel like there's some consequences if they attack us.
Hello, I was born and raised on a dairy farm in upstate New York. I was wondering if you have any aspirations of going forward of bringing in any type of animals, cows, chickens, pigs of that nature?
So when we first started meeting with the city to negotiate this license agreement, part of our proposal was that we had chickens. And I can tell you that the people I was meeting with from the city, they were almost foaming at the mouth. They were like, no chickens, no chickens, no chickens. I was like, okay, no chickens. You know, I mean, they were like freaking out. I couldn't believe it. And so rather than sabotage the whole project, we said, okay, cool, no chickens. So chickens are illegal in the city of Detroit. Raising chickens is illegal in the city of Detroit. Raising goats is illegal in the city of Detroit. Raising bees is illegal in the city of Detroit. Now, yes, and you might want to check your laws here. It might be the same thing here. Now, the bees, you know, that's kind of ridiculous. So they just ignore that. They don't try to enforce that. And what the city has decided to do is that they just turn a blind eye. There's many people raising chickens and goats in Detroit, even though it's so-called illegal. But the city has decided they'll turn a blind eye to it unless a neighbor calls and complains. So I have a friend who was raising goats, and a neighbor complained, and the city came and confiscated the goats. And this has happened on numerous occasions, the same with chickens. So because we are on land that the city claims it owns, and because we're not really, you know, my main goal each day is to keep handcuffs off of me, frankly. So, you know, we pick and choose our battles. So that's, you know, but also simultaneously there are people working to revise the urban agriculture ordinance that was passed in 2013. Before then, even gardening wasn't really legal in Detroit. It wasn't illegal, but it was not a permitted use. So now the ordinance that was passed in 2013 has legalized and prescribed the ways in which plant-based agriculture should be done. But because there was a lot of pushback from residents, and I was sharing this with somebody, I think John, last night, that many residents of the city don't think it's a cool idea to have chickens next door to them or goats. So there's a lot of pushback from residents. And so part of what I've learned about making revolution is that you can't move too far ahead of where the people are, or you'll be isolated and wiped out. And so we have to kind of move people with us, you know, and so there's some work now to have a second part of the ordinance written that legalizes the keeping of chickens, goats, and bees. But currently it's still illegal, and so rather than create a whole lot of problems for ourselves, we're not doing it.
I just had a comment sitting here thinking about one of the first meetings that I was in with John Lewis, and he said, learning how to grow your own food is one of the most revolutionary acts that you can do. And my comment is just that I think your presentation has really affirmed those words that he said, and I'll never forget him sharing those words with us in that meeting.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I love your hair, by the way. Proud and unrestrained.
Just not a question, but a commentary. there was a sorority in Roanoke that every year used to have a celebrity cook-off. And I was there with my black beans and roasted corn and everything over rice. But they used the proceeds of that to build a well in the mother country, okay? So I'm thinking about this collaborative and the idea of people here who are in a position to share, get a project that's vetted, so you're not buying the cheaper Mercedes, but to do a water well, or to do something that's benefiting. And there's a heifer project. There are a lot of things out there that we might be able to support if we had some guidance from those people who know, like in Cameroon and maybe some of the things you all have done. Thank you. Thank you for tonight.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. And again, it's an honor. And that's John Lewis's father, for those who don't know. And I had the honor of being able to chat with him for just a few minutes today. And so a lot of praise has been given to John R. Lewis III. I do want to say this, that the apple don't fall too far from the tree. And so in talking to him, it was clear to me that it was like in John Lewis's DNA almost to do the things he did. So I just want to give praise and honor to his father. Thank you. And I've been involved in a project, by the way, where we installed a well in Senegal. And for maybe $1,000, which, you know, people spend $1,000 here like it's nothing, right? You can change the life of a whole village, you know? And so I agree 100% with you. And we need to find ways to connect in real ways, not rhetorical ways, but real ways with the African continent and really help spur development there.
I have my father, you know, Malcolm was a inspiration to you.
Yes, I know your father was Benjamin Kareem. I got the story. I got the lowdown.
So he wrote the introduction to Alex Haley's, you know. What Malcolm and Martin, they did on a big scale, it wasn't, I mean, it was with being Muslim, it was sort of, you don't eat pork, you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't drink, but it was always separate but equal. And I wish that Malcolm or Martin or we had other people to like direct the dietary position as we are people, and versus trying to drink from the same water fountain or trying to, you know, be acceptable to someone else. And I think that, no offense to anyone else, but Ramadan and fasting is a good thing. Like, sometimes you can go without a meal, you know? When you go without a meal, you know exactly what you want to eat. And it makes you become a better person. And so, like, a lot of our behaviors, it's from because we're hungry or we're thirsty or these are the natures. And if we can point ourselves into those mindfulness situations which circumvents religion and what have you. And it's such a important thing besides just being a good person. It's something that we all share. You know, we all hungry, we all defecate, we all, you know. So I think that it's important for us to understand what we're taking in our bodies versus how we feel emotionally.
Yeah, thank you very much. And, you know, I truncated a lot of my presentation, believe it or not. Yeah, but I'll just say that I agree 100% with what you're saying. Every year leading up to the equinox, which this year I think is March 20th or something like that, I do a 7-day fast. I used to do longer fast, 21 days, and with just like water or juices, not eating in the evening either, but just straight juice. And I can say that absolutely fasting has multiple benefits. One, it helps us develop our discipline, and it helps our, if you will, your higher self to be in control of your lower self, if you want to word it that way, or your desires are not leading you around through the world, that you have some discipline over yourself, but also gives your digestive system a chance to cleanse itself. And then also, I don't want to get spooky, but I'll just say that if anybody has ever fasted for extended periods of time, you begin to have all kind of dreams and all kind of messages that are sent to you. In fact, some people, when they fast, they keep a journal so they can write their dreams down. And, you know, some people say, well, that's how the ancestors communicate. So sometimes when you clear out, and I'll end by saying that certain foods, I think, tether us more to the earth plane, and other foods allow us to rise to our fullest occasion.
Yo, so I want to just thank, first of all, Jesse, Susan, Megan, thank you all for being so supportive and helping us bring this to light. Thank you, Institute for Contemporary Art at VCU. Thank you for hosting us this evening. I wanted to just give you all some future reference of what's happening next. You know, if you want to connect with our organization, Happily Natural, please come visit Sankofa Community Orchard. Every Saturday is Dirt Therapy from 1 to 3. If you're not so inclined to be doing the outdoorsy thing, you know, we always take donations and support from community. And we're also, people ask me a lot, like, how they can volunteer with us. And I've been really intentional about saying that I can be very didactic and tell you to come weed this row or come plant these transplants or help us clear this brush. But I much more value people coming to the space with ideas, visions, imaginations of how they can be involved and bring that to the space and let us co-create the world that we want to see. I appreciate you all for coming out. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you in the field. Peace and power.